When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. As an integrative specialist and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. If you're enjoying the show, an easy way to support is to leave us a 5-star review. It's a free way to support the show and help more people discover these simple, life-changing practices. My guest today, super excited to bring this one to you. Adam Bramlage is the founder and CEO of Flow State Micro, a mushroom company and microdosing education platform. He's worked with hundreds of people one-on-one to guide them through the microdosing experience. Through his microdosing masterclass with Psychedelics Today, his Microdosing 101 with Double Blind Magazine, and the microdosing movement with San Francisco Psychedelic Society, he's taught more than 10,000 people online about best practices for safe and effective microdosing. So if microdosing is something that you are interested in, this is a great podcast for you, because really we dive into so many important things about microdosing, what it is, dosage levels, things to consider as far as integration, as far as your dosing protocols, as far as the benefits and what you can expect from a microdosing practice, as well as comparing and contrasting micro and macro experiences, some of the history. Adam has some really cool information and research that he's done about how far back microdosing and working with psychedelic substances goes in human evolution. And really, really enjoyed this podcast. It's been a long time coming. So grateful that I was able to connect with Adam. He has a new Microdosing Facilitator Training Program that he's a part of with a whole team of amazing other people. So we're going to put the link to that on the show page. Make sure you check that out, or check out his website. That's Adam Bramlage of Flow State Micro for more information. And he talks more about it during the interview. So before we jump in, as long as you're not driving or in a place where it would be dangerous, just allow yourself to close your eyes and then just bring your attention to your breathing. Notice where you feel your breath in your body, and just bringing your awareness and your attention to that sensation of the breath. Allow this connection, this awareness to bring you into the present moment, letting go of any other thoughts, any other plans, any other things that the mind may be busy with, and just connecting with the present moment through the breath. And this seemingly simple practice is something that you can use. It's the basis of mindfulness meditation. But even if you're not sitting for long periods of time, even taking a pause for a moment or a minute or two, a few times during your day, slowing down, feeling your feet underneath you, or if you're sitting down, how your body is supported, connecting to your breath, and using that sensation and that connection to the breath to bring yourself back when the mind starts to wander or drift off into thought. It's an easy, approachable way to start to build a mindfulness practice for yourself. And approachable is really the name of the game here, especially when we're talking about microdosing. One of the things that Adam and I talk about during this conversation is psychedelics have so much potential, and the macro, the bigger experiences can be very, very beneficial. And yet, there's a lot of time that you need for a macro experience, time to prepare, time for the actual experience itself, and then time to integrate and to unpack and process and figure out how you're going to take that experience and integrate it into the rest of your life to create a cohesive whole. So that can be a lot. It's not quite approachable for everyone. And we're not even talking about the obvious elephant in the room, which is that in many cases, these substances are not yet completely legal where you may be living. So the microdosing experience is much more approachable, much more accessible. It's not about getting high, so to speak, as much as allowing these medicines to work sometimes on our very subtle levels in the body and our energy and our mind. And so, yeah, just starting with a moment or two of a very accessible breathing practice seemed to be in alignment as well. So now that we were all dropped in together, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Adam Bramlage. Hey, Adam Bramlage, welcome to the Vital Point podcast.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It feels like it's been a long time coming. We first connected at the MAPS conference last year and started talking about it then. So glad that we were able to make it happen.
Yeah, I think I got so just energized at the MAPS conference and so fulfilled that I took a podcast break. And this is actually the first podcast I've done in close to a year. So thanks for having me.
Oh, wow. That's an honor. That's very cool. What's your experience been like since that conference? It seemed like it was a big sort of milestone for a lot of people.
Yeah, that conference was a huge milestone. It really showed that psychedelics are here and now, and people are interested. There were more than 12,000 people there. I helped moderate a talk with James Fadiman, and it was standing room only. There were people pouring out the doors, people sitting on the floor. So people are really interested about psychedelics. They're really interested about microdosing. So Denver was amazing. I'm looking forward to going back to Denver next June. They've got another one planned. But since Denver, it's just become more popular. More people are finding me online, reaching out to me, interested in microdosing, interested in coaching. So I really think that psychedelics and microdosing are only becoming more popular as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like a weird time too, because I don't know, I think we're about the same age, like sort of the propaganda and the messaging that we got growing up versus like sometimes I think what are people doing now that aren't so involved in the psychedelic world? Like it must be really confusing to hear sort of messages that are completely opposite to what they got growing up,
Yeah, and that was some heavy messaging that was put on people. And I think that that's a lot of the reason right now that a lot of the research is being done in psilocybin, or with psilocybin, I should say, is because it doesn't have those 3 letters LSD that scared so many people for so many decades. So yeah, there was misinformation campaigns for decades. And now that's why I think it's so important for people like yourself and myself and your podcast to educate people. Because when it comes to education and the facts, psychedelics have been a part of our life since the beginning of time, and they're a part of animal life. And we can trace psychedelic use back to our oldest ancient ancestors.
Yeah, you were starting to talk about that before we hit record, so I think that's just a good place to maybe dive a little bit deeper. The history of microdosing and maybe just psychedelic use in general.
Yeah, so I've been able to trace microdosing and psychedelic use back to the Australian Aboriginals, who recently genetic DNA has shown are our longest unchanged ancestors from Africa, right? So they made the migration to Africa, to Australia. They were cut off to the world until a few thousand years ago. So their ways weren't affected, they weren't changed. And the first explorers who came upon them found them using patchouli, which was this dried flower that they used in small doses to stimulate them and help in hunting. They also used patchouli in large doses like DMT to have dreamlike psychedelic states. So our oldest ancient ancestors actually used microdosing as a hunting advantage. So microdosing may be one of the earliest hunting advantages that helped Homo sapiens become better hunters and therefore, make their way across the planet. What's amazing is most of these ancient cultures I've found that used microdosing to aid in hunting, they found out about microdosing from watching animals, right? Hunters or shepherds are always observing animals. So the Australian Aboriginals found a bunch of dead emus by a watering hole, and then they realized that these flowers had dropped in the watering hole and they had killed the emus. They also realized that they could eat the dead emus without being affected. And then they slowly began to experiment with those flowers, and they found that chewing small amounts of these dried flowers in their cheek, kind of like tobacco, actually stimulated appetite, or I'm sorry, it suppressed appetite, stimulated energy, was said to improve their visual acuity, and allowed them to hunt for hours at a time without food or water in this hot desert climate. So microdosing, intoxication, psychedelic use goes back to the beginning of our species.
Wow, that's super cool. And as you were speaking, it just like I was envisioning or sort of feeling how it really slots into the stoned ape theory that Terence McKenna talked about as well. That the mushrooms really help to give our way back ancestors this sort of advantage that other, if they weren't eating the mushrooms, they weren't getting that same advantage for their senses, for their hunting, not to mention maybe their consciousness as well.
Yeah, and McKenna was really onto something because he talked about visual acuity, and he talked about the
Right.
ability for small amounts of mushrooms to actually dilate the pupils and allow you to actually see better when hunting. And in my research, I found the Takano tribe of the Amazon that actually watched the jaguar, and in studying the jaguar, they saw it chewing on the ayahuasca vine, right? And so the Takano Indian tribe use ayahuasca vine in small amounts to aid in hunting. And they actually believe that it improves their vision. It actually improves their visual acuity. So there's actually ancient indigenous cultures who believe the same thing that McKenna was hypothesizing, which is these small amounts of psychedelics actually allow our eyes to see better in the jungle, in the desert, in these different climates where we're hunting. So he was really onto something, and I'm sure he knew about the Takano, and that may be where he based his ideas. But you can see the improvement of vision in the Takano along with the stoned ape theory. And then the other thing about the stoned ape theory is, there's 3 dose levels that McKenna talks about in the stoned ape theory, right? He talks about the microdose, which allowed them to be better hunters, which allowed them maybe to improve their weapon making, which allowed them to maybe hunt better as a community. And then he talked about the mini dose level, which was like an aphrodisiac level and may have been at a level where, people were coming together and raising children together in a group environment, right? Nobody necessarily knew who the children were, so everybody raised the children like they were theirs, making for a more tight-knit community. And then he talked about the large dose. Now, the large dose experience isn't going to make you a better hunter, right? You're not going to be able to chase an animal if you've taken a large dose of psychedelics. But it's going to open your mind. It's going to take you to different places, different universes. He believes it's what led to language and religion and music. But most people don't talk about that small dose of the stoned ape theory, which is that improvement of visual acuity. And there was actually a study in 1972 by Roland Fisher where he gave small amounts of psilocybin to college students and then had them track certain things on a computer and actually saw that small amounts of psilocybin did improve visual acuity.
That's pretty cool. I'm curious too, in addition to that visual acuity, like what are some of the other benefits for people working with microdosing in the modern age, since most of us aren't hunting, in,
Right.
in the Western part of the world?
Yeah, most of us aren't hunting. So most of the benefits we're seeing these days are in first mental health, right? The most important impacts we're seeing are in mental health, are in depression and anxiety. Then we're also seeing an improvement in things like performance, right? A lot of people are using psychedelics on the job, maybe for computer programming or maybe for design, or maybe they're a musician or an artist, something like that. And then we're also seeing it for creativity. It's really helping people with creativity, thinking outside of the box. Journalists are using it, authors for first drafts and for writing, musicians again for creativity. But I would say 90% of the people that I am helping or working with are working with it for mental health. And they're finding a huge, huge relief from depression and anxiety. And I would also say that 3/4 of these people seeking me out are on antidepressants, or have been on antidepressants for sometimes decades. And some of these people are polydrugged as well, right? Which is a major practice in Western medicine today, which is your antidepressant isn't working, so the doctor puts you on an antidepressant and on an anti-anxiety. You're unable to sleep from your antidepressant and your anti-anxiety, so the doctor puts you on a sleeping medication. Next thing you know, you're on 3 or 4 medications, and you were just trying to get help from depression. So what's really fascinating is people are able to microdose alongside of their psychopharmaceuticals with the right support and guidance. And then they're able to slowly taper their pharmaceuticals to the point where most of the time they're not in need of them at all anymore.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I see it in some of my work as well. Like I work a couple of days a week at a, residential treatment center for behavioral and mental health. And so that poly drugging and that over medication is just so rampant. And not only that, like maybe not for everyone, but definitely I've seen it, and I'm sure you could speak to this more. The antidepressants aren't really solving the problem. They're just suppressing and like pushing down what's inside. So it's almost like not only do you have to take this drug, but now you're dependent on it, because when you start to try to come off of it or change the balance of the medication, all that stuff that's been suppressed starts to like come out, and that can be really overwhelming and like push people back towards, oh, like, well, maybe another, pharmaceutical is the answer, even though that's moving in the wrong direction.
And that's just it. Doctors are really good at prescribing drugs, but they really have no clue at how to effectively get you off, how to taper you, how to titrate you. And that's why there's so much hope with microdosing, is this could be a non-toxic, non-habit forming, effective way to help people taper off of these medications that mostly they have a life sentence on and they have to take forever. Right? And so what's amazing is I think it's like 60% of people antidepressants don't work for, right? So maybe 1/3 or 30% of people they actually work for, and for those people they're hugely effective. And I want to honor what antidepressants do for those people. But for most people they don't work, and there's side effects, right? People get numbed out, they lose their libido and their sex drive. They don't feel like hanging out and being social with people. So we need to have different options for people in today's society other than these antidepressants, right? And what we're seeing is that microdosing of psilocybin and LSD is hugely effective for people. They just did a recent study with brain neurons in a petri dish and mice, where they found that psilocybin bound to the TrkB receptor. The TrkB receptor is the receptor having to do with depression, 1,000 times stronger than that of a natural antidepressant, right? Now, that is large dose psilocybin binding 1,000 times stronger than a natural antidepressant. So maybe microdosing is 100 times stronger, maybe it's 50 times stronger, maybe it's 10 times stronger, but it's stronger and it's a better option. And something magical is happening with the psilocybin and the brain. There is an intelligence to these mushrooms. They're millions of years old, right? We're probably never going to be able to describe on a podcast in words how they actually work, but they do work. And they've been hugely effective for depression, and that's where I see most people coming to me is for looking for help in depression and getting off of psychopharmaceuticals.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, I've been blown away. Even though my parents were sort of ex hippies, they certainly had a particular stance on drugs in general, like when I was growing up. And so it's been really interesting in the last couple of years that both of them independently have come to me and said, like, hey, I read this article or I heard this thing. I mean, my dad was so cute. Like literally he called me up and he's like, so there was this article in the paper in LA. Have you heard of this guy, Paul something? And I'm like, I didn't even need him to say the last name. I'm like, oh yeah. And so, having these really interesting conversations that I would never have thought I would be growing up, and he was like, hey, I'm getting older. I read in this article that psilocybin can help with memory and for preventing Alzheimer's. So that's something that's important to me.
I was speaking with somebody last night from a nonprofit having to do with Alzheimer's and dementia about the possibility of microdosing and psychedelics being an answer to Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'd say one of the most incredible miracle stories, and I quote stories plural, have been clients I've worked with whose loved ones have suffered from Alzheimer's or dementia. And 100 milligrams of psilocybin, 100 milligrams of lion's mane, chaga, cordyceps, and maitake have been hugely helpful for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. In one case, there was a 92-year-old individual in a nursing home who was catatonic in a wheelchair. They were head down, eyes closed. They hadn't spoken to their family in months, and they gave him a microdose. And when in 20 minutes he sat up, head up, eyes open, he began to talk, and he began to even tell stories about times when he was 6 or 7. He could recollect memories from when he was a kid. And this went on for multiple days as they gave him microdoses. There's stories of Oteil Boobridge, who's the bass player for Dead and Company and Allman Brothers, giving it to his father at his end of life with Alzheimer's. And most recently, microdosing with his mother. I really think that microdosing of psilocybin and lion's mane specifically is going to be helpful answer to Alzheimer's and dementia. As we grow older, our brain naturally degenerates, right? We know that when you consume psilocybin and lion's mane, it naturally creates neurogenesis, new brain growth, and improves neuroplasticity. So it does make sense that this could be hugely effective. Unfortunately, we don't have any clinical trials, any studies going on, and all of these miracle stories are coming from the underground.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to shifting as these medicines come more out into the mainstream, and as more people are, listening to these stories and, reading the research, and, folks like you that are, helping to be out there and get the word out. 'Cause would you agree that it's kind of similar to cannabis in the way that like cannabis research jumped up so much after it became so much more legalized or decriminalized? We started to see these, research studies that couldn't have been done 20 years ago. So I'm looking forward to sort of a similar situation with psilocybin and other psychedelics.
Yeah. There's going to be some amazing research coming out in the next few decades. And at the same time, if you look at our indigenous ancestors and you look at all of these people around the world, and, you know, the ancestors have really done the research, right? This is something that has been used for thousands of years in community for healing. And it's only really since 1972 with Nixon's war on drugs that, you know, they've been made illegal and people have been imprisoned. And again, that's why really it's important that we decriminalize everything before we legalize it, so that we stop putting people in jail and we don't over medicalize psychedelics, so that only doctors or people with MDs or necessarily medical licenses can administer these treatments. So the thing is, I was in cannabis for a decade, and I watched it go from Prop 215, which was the medical that Dennis Perone and all of these AIDS activists in San Francisco created. And then I watched legalization come in, and it totally ruined the industry. It totally destroyed the legacy farmers and the cottage industry, and it continues to destroy the industry. So yes, I hope there's more studies for psychedelics. And as we prove out that psychedelics are helpful for things like mental health and trauma, we need to make sure that we don't go the way of cannabis, because I don't think we did a very, very good job here in California with that. And for me, psychedelics is a whole different level of cannabis. I believe very strongly in cannabis and the cannabis plant. But for me, it was kind of like a Band-Aid over the wound. Over the wound. Whereas when I'm microdosing or working with psilocybin, it feels like I can dive into that wound, and I actually do some deep, deep healing. So my hope, as somebody that graduated out of the cannabis space and was pretty heartbroken over how it went, is that we don't go that same way here with psychedelics.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, it's bringing back something that was really evident to me at the MAPS conference last year, which was there were so many people that I met that were in some sort of, you know, health or mental health profession that were there. And those tickets for that conference weren't cheap, right? Like a fairly expensive event. And I was there as part of an integration, company that was doing integration. So a lot of the questions that I was asking as I was, talking with people were about, integration and do you have a ceremony or a journey coming up? Or do you have something that's fairly recent? And they're like, no, I've never had a psychedelic experience, but I'm just seeing that my clients are interested in it. Or, I'm seeing the writing on the wall, so I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve. And that's a little bit concerning, to have people that are going to be administering these medicines that don't have any experience in expanded states of consciousness, whether it's through psychedelics or even like, MAPS is, doing a lot of holotropic breath work for their facilitators and their therapists so that they can have some sort of direct experience. Because like you were saying, we can talk and talk and talk, but it doesn't quite get to the actual experience itself. So I really think it's really important to have people that have some sort of training and experience, not just the medical people.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, which is for the medical people, we need to make sure that they have some experience. You've gone to school for 8 to 12 years. That's great. That checks those boxes. But now you need to go down to Peru and sit with ayahuasca for 2 weeks, or, whatever psychedelic you're working with, you need to spend a few months at least working with it, right? Which is why we need to make sure that we don't just medicalize psychedelics and we don't just give it to doctors and investors and big capital and the people that can afford to go to school for 12 years. We need to make sure that the indigenous teachers all over the world, not in the United States, can still come to the United States and practice, right? We need to make sure that they can still come to the United States and train people. So I have to be really honest with you. I am a little bit scared about the over medicalization of psychedelics. It's already somewhat beginning to go that way with ketamine and ketamine clinics and how that's looking right now. So we need to make sure that we protect the indigenous people, and we need to make sure that, not just MDs have the ability to administer this. And you talk about a lot of people showing up in Denver who have no experience, and they need to be educated, right? And for a lot of these people, they might not smoke 5-MeO DMT the first time. They might not go to Peru and do ayahuasca in Costa Rica. But you know what would be a really safe and great place for them to start? Microdosing. And that's why I think microdosing is so important. It's such a safe and effective way to introduce new people to psychedelics, that it's only going to help the psychedelic movement moving forward, for us to train people and facilitators to guide people and to show people how to experience this. And again, when I started experiencing and experimenting with psychedelics 20 plus years ago in high school, no one was talking about microdosing. It was, here's a hit of acid, Adam. Good luck. I hope you make it through this next 12 hours. Or better yet, here's a bag of mushrooms. Eat the whole thing. Good luck. And you know what? If you didn't eat the whole thing, you got shamed or you got ridiculed, and you had to eat the whole thing. So thank goodness we've evolved past that locker room mentality of psychedelics, and we're at a place now where we can come at it with a more mature attitude, right? So I think microdosing has a really important place in psychedelics. I think it's the entry level point for all of these newbies and beginners who don't know where to start.
I was laughing because I saw something recently. It was like, I've been involved in Tucson with the Tucson Psychedelic Society, and there's a lot of older folks, the older hippie kind of people that are, hanging around. And they, there was one guy that said something. He was like, back in my day, we didn't, what's this integration stuff and harm reduction? Like if somebody ate too much acid, we just tied him to a tree and let them, work it out. And I'm like, I don't think that's the flex that you're like meaning it as. Like, that doesn't sound good at all. Thank God we've evolved past that. And we're starting to like have a more context and more support around like what integration actually is and how we can get from point A to point B, and not just, roll the dice and hope that the journey ends up, in a good place and not like in a weird, spiral.
And don't get me wrong, that worked for a lot of people. There were a lot of people that, just took 4 hits of acid and tripped for 4 days straight and figured out the world. But for most people coming into psychedelics, and a lot of them are even baby boomers who didn't do psychedelics back in the day, they need a safe entry point, right? And in order to take a large dose journey, you need to set aside 8 to 12 hours. You need to have guidance. You need to have days before to prep and days after to prep. And that's where microdosing can be a little bit different. It's something people can incorporate into their daily life once they've been guided and trained how to do it properly. And then it's a tool in the toolbox that can really help them. And it's not something that you have to only limit for when you're down in the Maloca in Peru.
Right. In your opinion, because I've seen this online a bit and just been like, this is interesting. When I first learned about microdosing and started working with it myself, it was a completely sub-perceptual dose, meaning like I can take it and I'm really not going to feel the effects of the medicine on like a conscious level, like in the same way, you drink a few beers and you start to feel a buzz, or you smoke a joint and you feel stoned, or, you eat like a gram or more of mushrooms and you can definitely feel something. But then I started to notice that there were other people that were sort of advocating for like a little bit more than a sub-perceptual dose, like sort of like they had like a word for it, like sort of a glittery, like that there's a little bit of something that you're noticing. So like, what's your opinion on what a microdose means, or like what the amount is?
That's a great question. And again, a microdose amount and sweet spot is unique to everybody. What was the question? Sorry, one more time.
Yeah, like for you, is a microdose like completely sub-perceptual,
Right.
or just,
Great.
a little bit of little?
Great question. So, Dr. Fadiman first started describing it as sub-perceptual. And then a few years ago, I was talking with him and I said, Jim, a lot of the reports we're getting is that people are feeling a little bit something, right? They're feeling, a little bit of momentum, some motivation. They're feeling a little bit happier, something like that, okay? It's non-intoxicating though, right? They're not feeling high. They're just feeling a little something, a little spark, a little something above sub-perceptual, right? Another word Paul Stamets has used is subsensorium, right? I like to say non-intoxicating, right? You're not intoxicating. There's no point in the day where you're like, woo, I'm high. Hopefully these mushrooms, don't kick in anymore because I'm definitely high, right? That is not a microdose. So it's different for everybody. Some people like to have a dose where they feel a little bit something. They're stimulated a little bit. They're energized, but there's nothing psychedelic about it. You're not seeing visuals. You can drive your car. You can do your job. You can hang out with your kids. You can be social in community. So subsensorium was kind of an old definition. Sub-perceptual, another older definition. Again, I say non-intoxicating, but if at any point you notice you've taken something and you're feeling high, that's too strong of a dose. That's not a microdose. But you might feel a little bit something. And at the same time, you might go through your whole day and be like, that was a great day. Oh, wait, I microdosed, right? So the level is kind of a level where it's easy to forget that you microdosed. And then you might have moments where you're thriving or you're feeling great and you're like, oh, wait, I did microdose. So it's different for everybody, just like the dose can be a little bit different for everybody. But again, you should feel a little bit of a spark, right? If you're not noticing a little something, it's possible you might want to up the dose a little bit.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you just said. Like I like the completely sort of, I totally forgot that I took a microdose, but later on in the day, or especially if I've microdosed for a few days in a row, like if I'm following like the Stamets protocol, I'm like, oh wait, why do I feel so good? Oh, that's right. I totally forgot. And then maybe say if I'm like going for a long hike or something, I might double that microdose so that I am getting just a little bit, like a little sparkly, a little bit, a little bit of effects, but again, not intoxicating in the way that I think of working with psilocybin.
Yeah, and I do it the same way when I go out and I microdose, or maybe I'm at the ocean and I know I'm in a really relaxing and comfortable place. For me, I find 100 milligrams of psilocybin seems to be the sweet spot for the microdose. And then if I go to the beach, maybe I double that, it's 200, or go for a hike, it's 200. But again, 200 is not psychedelic, right? I'm just maybe feeling a little bit more energized, a little bit more stimulated. And I think it's important for people to play around with those levels, right? And to know the difference between what does 100 milligrams do for me and what does 200 milligrams do for me. I know 300 milligrams is a concert level for me. That's the amount I'm going to take at a concert, and I'm going to definitely start to feel a little bit psychedelic. And that seems to be the area for me, right around 300 milligrams, where I start to really notice that I've taken something.
Yeah, I love that. And similar for me, like I think that's kind of when I know I'm ready to take a break, is like it's almost like I'm feeling so good that I kind of forget. Like I'm like, oh shoot, today was a microdosing day, but wait, I'm feeling so good. I think it's maybe time to taper off, and that'll usually happen sort of like if I decide to do like a 4-week protocol, somewhere like by the end of the 3rd week or beginning of the 4th week is when I'm like, yeah, I think I'm good. I think I can take a break now.
And that's the amazing thing. That's what we see. The longer people microdose, the less they need it, right? So after a few weeks, even a few days, and I see the same thing from you, as people start on a Stamets or a Fadiman protocol and they link up a couple good days, and then it's time for a day on again, and they wake up and they feel so good on their day off. They realize, I don't need this. And so what happens is people are benefiting from a microdose on their days off, right? There's a 24, 48, maybe even a 72-hour afterglow to these microdoses, which is so incredible that we can benefit when we're not even taking them. That is the exact opposite of Western medical psychopharmaceuticals, where you're going to take this pill for the rest of your life. So that's what's so amazing for microdosing, is this isn't something that people do for the rest of their life. They use it for a few days, weeks, or months, and then they're like, I feel incredible. I don't need it anymore. And then they put the tool back in the toolbox, and maybe they come back to it in a few weeks or months or whenever they need it again. But the more people microdose, ultimately, the less they end up needing it. And you bring up the point again that the days off can be so good that you just stop your protocol and you're like, all right, I'm not going to dose today, and I'm going to take days off until intuitively I feel called to dose again.
Right. Yeah. It's that following that intuition more than just any, being strict with the protocol. But I also think that it's been my experience of being strict with the protocols that has helped me develop that intuition and like kind of know when to ease off or when it's time to pick it back up again.
And that's exactly it. These protocols that Jim and Paul developed are simply here to get people started, right? They're here for beginners who are like, I don't know what to do. Do this. And then what I always find is after a week or 2 or 3 of doing this protocol, thanks to microdosing, people get so in touch with their intuition and their own inner voice that they use it as needed. And they literally come up with an intuitive protocol, which is, as a coach and facilitator, what we're aiming for them to do is really get in touch with their own inner healer, their own inner voice, their own intuition, and create a protocol that works for them, which for a lot of people might be 1 day a week or 3 times a month. Or maybe they come across a challenging week in their life, mental health wise, and they do it 5 days on and 2 days off. But it's about teaching people how to use this and how to come up with the right protocol that works for them.
So for a listener that maybe is unfamiliar with what we're talking about, could you speak to the Fadiman and the Stamets protocols? And then maybe if there's another protocol that you're really, a fan of as well, because those are the 2 most popular, right?
Absolutely. So the 2 most popular are the Fadiman protocol, which is 1 day on, 2 days off. And that is a research protocol, right? He developed that for research or citizen science. And the idea was you take the microdose 1 day, the first day off, you're benefiting from the afterglow. And then the second day off, you're returning to a baseline sober, right? And then you dose then on the next day. That is a protocol that we recommend, or I recommend, for healthy normals, right? People who are doing really good in their life. This isn't something that they're looking to help maybe improve with mental health, depression, and anxiety. For those conditions, I usually highly recommend the Stamets protocol, which is either 5 days on, 2 days off, or 4 days on, 3 days off. And that was developed by mycologist Paul Stamets. I find for people that are suffering from ruminating thoughts and intense things like depression and anxiety, that lining up 4 or 5 good days in a row over the course of the week is hugely, hugely effective. So I'm more often than not, because of my clientele coming to me for mental health, recommending the Stamets protocol than the Fadiman protocol to start. Then there's also the Microdosing Institute protocol. They're a group over in Holland, and that is day on, day off. That's another protocol as well. And then lastly, the intuitive protocol, which is what you and I were talking about, which is eventually, after a few weeks or a month of using the Stamets or Fadiman protocol, you're transitioning to a protocol that works for you, that you're developing as needed with your life.
Right. And then what things that we should be doing adjunct or with the psilocybin as well, like Flow State Micro, your company sells like a functional mushroom blend. What are some of the mushrooms or other things that we should be combining with the psilocybin for maximum benefit?
Great question. Yeah, I think most importantly, it's important to realize that all mushrooms are magic, right? And they all have incredible medicinal benefits. The flow state blend is lion's mane, chaga, cordyceps, and maitake. But to keep it simple, the ones that we're seeing or I'm seeing used most are lion's mane and psilocybin. If you're going to keep it simple and you just want to come down to the two most important, in my opinion, I think it is the psilocybin and the lion's mane. And I think as far as adjuncts, what I find is when people start microdosing, they naturally start craving healthier things in their life, right? They start to eat better. They start to exercise. They start to drink more water. They're drinking less alcohol. They're smoking less weed and less cigarettes. So all of the natural healthy adjuncts seem to kind of show up in unison with psilocybin. I like to call magic mushrooms or psilocybin the great motivator, right? They seem to motivate people and really give them that momentum to get off of the couch after years of depression. I know that's what it did for me. So some really important adjuncts that are free are exercise, right? Getting out and just walking 8 to 10,000 steps a day is good for depression. I like to get early morning sunshine. I like to have my bare feet on the grass and do at least 30 minutes of grounding every day. So there are those type things. There's breath work. There's meditation. There's diet. There's all kinds of different things that really start to kind of come up to the surface once people start to microdose and they start to look at all the things in their life that are affecting the way they feel, their gut microbiome, their brain, that default mode network. So for me, I was super depressed 5 years ago. It was microdosing that really helped motivate me and get me into a lifestyle of exercise and eating well.
Oh, that's amazing. Are there, in your opinion, are there conditions or people for whom a macrodose is more appropriate than microdosing? Maybe just to kickstart things, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts is that there are certain things that a macrodose or a large dose psychedelic experience can access and heal that microdosing cannot get to, right? I want to be really clear that I am a strong believer in large dose assisted psychedelic work. And there are certain people that are going to need that large dose experience to maybe help clear out and heal certain things from their past. Now, microdosing is a good jumpstart or springboard to that healing and to start kind of bringing some of that stuff up and maybe beginning to work with it and rewrite the story. That's what's been so helpful with me, and the momentum or the motivation behind mushrooms and psilocybin is it's really helped me to rewrite the story. It's really shown me that I have the power, and only I have the power, to write the story of my life. And either I can write a negative story or I can write a positive story. So psilocybin has been really helpful in the motivation and momentum area of my life.
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah, I can relate to that. The being able to kind of rewrite the story, or also it sounds like being able to kind of step away and not be so connected to the story, because when we're so fused to it, it can be hard to kind of get a bigger perspective or some room to kind of shift and change.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a major synergy and connection between microdosing and macrodosing. I think they're both different tools, and I think that they're both hugely helpful. And I think that in the right set and setting, most every person on this planet, outside of people with schizophrenic diagnoses and stuff in the family, would greatly benefit from a professionally, guided large dose psychedelic experience. Like, I don't know anybody who hasn't experienced trauma as an adult or a child and wouldn't benefit from that. But it's hard for people in this legal setting to find good and trustworthy guides. So for a lot of people, microdosing is a lot more approachable. It's a lot more accessible. You can do it in your own home and your own world. And, a lot of the people, the majority of the people, 100% of the people I'm working with is all over phone or Zoom. So it's people all around the world who just want to talk to somebody about how they can safely and effectively add microdosing to their life.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier on the show, the macro experience, there's a lot of preparation and a lot of time that you need to sort of carve out so that you can get the most benefits, whether it's the preparation, that integration afterwards. It's not just go with this experience. And almost like there was another podcast that I was doing where we were talking about, like, it's almost like you go and you get like this big project, you got this big box, and now you're like, okay, now I gotta like put this stuff together and figure out where all these pieces go, and it's just sitting in my living room. I have to do something with it. I can't just ignore it. Versus the microdosing being more of like integration in real time, like it's happening as a part of your life, rather than, you're going to go down to Peru for 2 weeks, or, go sit in Mexico or Costa Rica with somebody. And like, really, like that's a big commitment for time. And then, especially I think most people that have had those macro experiences, that's where they really realize like, oh shoot, like I can't just go back to work on Monday, like the day after, an ayahuasca ceremony. That's probably not the best thing for me. So they start to, like my friends joke with me, like they're like, hey, you want to go, like, let's do a macro dose. And then they're like, yeah, but like, where do you have 2 weeks in your schedule to carve out? And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like that at this point,
It is. And people desperately need something right now that helps them in their day-to-day life, right? Like something that helps them when they're at work and that person they can't stand says something, they need it now. They don't need it, in Peru or at their buddy's house on the weekend. They need it in their day-to-day life. They need it in their car when they get cut off by the guy in rush hour. And again, that's why microdosing is accessible and so helpful for people, is it's benefiting them in their day-to-day life. They take it in their home. They take it at work. They take it in social functions. And what's so exciting is how many people I'm seeing that are giving up alcohol. And if they're going to go out and maybe they're going to dance with their friends, they'll microdose and they'll drink sparkling water all night and have such a better time. So I think there's a natural evolution. People are waking up. They're realizing that alcohol is poison, and that things like mushrooms not only are fun, make you giggle and laugh and puddle up with your friends, but they're incredibly healing, hugely insightful, and they have a fungal intelligence that I can't explain in English words, but is beneficial to every human on the planet under the right conditions, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's definitely, Stan Groff called psychedelics non-specific amplifiers. And my experience with microdosing has been it's amplified things just enough. Not like, so where it's overwhelming or like, oh God, I got to like leave this concert and go contemplate my life in the dark somewhere. But, amplified enough that things just feel good. I'm more empathetic. I'm more conversational. And definitely it's been a wonderful replacement for alcohol for me, for sure.
What a better place this world would be and is becoming when millions of people replace alcohol with mushrooms. I was at the Sphere in Vegas seeing Dead and Company this last weekend, and I watched passed out drunk people snoring during a show that they paid hundreds of dollars for. I also watched a few fall down the stairs and completely fall over. And it's just surprising to me in 2024 that anybody drinks alcohol anymore, and that anybody doesn't realize that it's poison, and that it turns people into idiots and makes them fall on their face and do stupid shit. And it was so cool to see all of these people at the show who you would think were drinking, and they were eating mushroom gummies, or they were passing around a chocolate bar. And I'm talking, I saw 50-year-olds eating mushrooms. I saw 60-year-olds eating mushrooms. I had a woman next to me that reminded me of my grandma. She was eating mushrooms. So it's just amazing to see mushrooms making such a huge movement across the country right now.
Yeah, I watched a lot of the really cool videos that you had posted of those shows at the Sphere, which looks like a really amazing time. And then I was sitting there just kind of contemplating, like, wow, this is really cool because number one, it's in Vegas, which is not known for like the most evolutionarily evolved like place. But like in one weekend, you had Dead and Company playing in these amazing shows, and you had EDC, which is become this huge, like almost cultural event within the, sort of psychedelic microcosm. And certainly for me, like, as I've been raving for half my life, and I remember going to EDC in like 2001, and to see what it's turned into, and all these people that are coming together to dance, to socialize, to be together in these new ways is really inspiring to me. Like, I wouldn't have thought, man, this is 20 years on, this is where we're going to be.
It is inspiring, and it was beautiful to see the EDC community combining with the Deadhead community, and they were all very similar, and they all have their beautiful outfits and their sparkles, and it was just, it's really amazing. And that's what we need more of in this world today, is we need more coming together in community and dancing and connecting and not talking about work or our problems, but just enjoying being alive and being human. And sometimes in these settings, psilocybin, MDMA, these other psychedelics are hugely helpful and help you to connect with your people and your community. And if you go back to Greek times, I mean, the Eleusinian mysteries, this is essentially what they were doing. They were getting all of these people together. They were taking ergot, which was LSD. They were having shows put on by females, and singing and music and probably chanting and dancing and who knows what else. But these are our ancient roots. We used to come together in the woods, drink mushroom tea, and dance around under the full moon at night. And that's where we came together as a community. That's where we gathered the secrets and the intelligence from nature, and that's where we learned how to be better human beings. And I hope we get back to more of that.
Yeah, for sure. We had Taylor Bratches on the podcast a while back, and she gave a talk at the MAPS conference last year about rave as ritual, and how it like filled this gap that we have in our modern culture of, these rites of passage, or these, communal gatherings, like you just, said, and how, things like the rave scene and bands like the Dead are really filling that gap that we don't have. Right. And it is really, really cool to look at it from that perspective, and not just, oh, well, there's just people just, getting high or something.
Well, no, I mean, you bring up a huge point, right? Nixon made the war on drugs in 1972. Ecstasy was legal for a short time in the 1980s. And it was truly the rave culture and the Deadheads during the 1980s, during this time of capitalism and Doritos and Tom Cruise and Top Gun and Goonies. These guys were keeping the psychedelic movement alive, the rave culture and the Deadheads. And there would be no modern legal psychedelic movement without the Deadheads, without Owsley Stanley, without the early LSD makers. But most importantly, the Deadheads who spread these chemicals and these mushrooms and whatnot, LSD, around the country. If the Dead showed up in town for a show, you were going to get all your psychedelics for the year back in the 1980s, right? If the rave came into town, you know where you could go to get MDMA. So again, it's really important that we give credit to the Grateful Dead, to the Deadhead community of fans, and to the rave culture, because during the 80s, 90s, 2000s, they really kept it alive when people weren't talking about it or discussing it.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe a good segue into talking about the microdosing facilitator training that you're doing, because one of the things I'm always curious about, especially as, somebody that still likes to go out to the occasional rave, maybe not as much as I did 20 years ago, but and is definitely sees the benefit of that set and setting and being able to work with psychedelics in that set and setting. But how do we keep it from being unintegrated or from like kind of spiraling out of control? What are some of the keys to you in terms of like being able to take those experiences and then integrate them into something that's like moving your life in a more positive direction rather than like something where you're escaping, or you just can't wait to go back to another show or another rave and like just kind of like party your face off?
The question is, are you integrating, right? And it's that great cartoon where you see the character, he's like, I'm going to go to the next ceremony, and then his shadow's climbing behind him, and they're like, integrate me, please, right?
Yeah.
So I think in today's time, we need to be really careful that we understand the importance of integrating each experience. And I think it's also important that we aren't going around collecting experiences like Cub Scout badges, right? And I think there are a lot of people out there that think that the more times you drink ayahuasca or the more doses you've taken, the closer you are to being enlightened. But the reality is, it's not about how many times you've done something. It's about how deeply and thoroughly you've integrated those experiences. And I think it was Alan Watts who says, when you get the call, you hang up the phone, right? And so if people are integrating their experiences properly, they're probably not going to need to do psychedelics multiple times a year for the rest of their life. Maybe it's something they save for once or twice or 3 special occasions on the year, right? But there is an issue in this space where people love to take psychedelics, and they love to take it as many times as they can and not integrate, and instead of integrating, go right back into ceremony. So we have to make sure that we're integrating our experiences, whether that's macrodosing or even something that seems as simple as microdosing. There's a lot going on in these small doses. There's a lot of things people are realizing, and they might need some support in integrating.
Yeah, 100%. And that was what kind of sparked me to reach back out to you and make sure that we got this conversation on the books. Was like, oh, cool, you got this amazing microdosing facilitator training program starting. And as I was looking through the information, I'm like, oh, you've got Laura Dawn, who's been on the podcast. You've got Daniel Shankin, who's been on the podcast. So it's cool to like see people that I know and that names I recognize. And I know James Fadiman's a part of it. So could you share a little bit more about that program and what it entails?
Yeah. Thank you. The Microdosing Facilitator Training is a 4-month online program. It starts July 17th, and we put together just an absolute dream team of amazing experts and scientists and clinicians and speakers. We've got Laura Dawn, as you said, Jim Fadiman, the father of modern microdosing. We've got Dr. Manesh Gurn from UCSF, Dr. Connor Murray from UCLA. We've got Courtney Watson, Maurice Bird, Reggie Harris, Stephen Wang from MAPS. We have an incredibly, incredibly talented and diverse team that's come together to really pioneer this idea of training microdosing facilitators. And this idea came to myself from having multiple professionals over the last few years, dozens, reach out to me, doctors, nurses, therapists, psychiatric nurses, large dose facilitators, asking for some kind of training about microdosing, because the majority of their clients were coming to them not asking about the large dose experience, but instead asking about the microdosing experience. So we felt, Danielle Nova of Psychedelics San Francisco Society and myself felt it was time to put something together to standardize and to really train people, and to create an online community of trained microdosing facilitators that can support ourselves over the next few years and be in contact as everybody begins to grow this facilitation practice. So again, I'm leading it with Danielle Nova of San Francisco Psychedelic Society. We've got 14 amazing guest teachers, and it's going to be from July to November of 2024.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put that link to that on the show page for sure. There was, as I was looking through the information for the program, one of the things that popped out to me, and I'm just curious if maybe you could speak to this for a moment, is, we definitely, you talked about integrative tools for stewarding transformative experiences, and then microdosing specific facilitation techniques. So what's an example of a microdosing specific facilitation technique that might be more appropriate to the microdosing setting?
Yeah. So, in regards to, for example, let's look at a person's first day, first week, and first month for microdosing. And this is all stuff that would be learned in the class. But we're teaching our facilitators that obviously there's some pre-integration before the first day. But there are 3 really important check-ins in that first week and month, and that's day 1. We're checking in with our clients after the end of day 1. There's week 1. We check in with the clients and integrate again after their first week. And then again, there's end of month 1. So those are 3 really important milestones and 3 really important places. As a microdosing facilitator, that it's extremely important to check in with your client. You're making sure that your dosage is right. You're making sure the substance is right. You're making sure that everything went right in their day, that the protocol is working. So that's kind of a standard procedure that we've developed strictly for the microdosing practice.
Cool. Yeah. As I keep recalling this like really funny story. It's just going to be a microdose. So I'm just going to take it. It'll be fine. And then like less than an hour later, and I was, luckily I worked remotely at the time, but I'm sitting there at work and I'm like, no, this is, this is way too much. Like, this is way more than a microdose. It was like definitely like one of those memes, like, oh wait, the dinosaur's over there talking to me. Like, I don't think that was a microdose. And I remember just laying down on my couch and my girlfriend came in. She's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, definitely not. So luckily I was able to like reschedule, meetings that I had and whatnot. But yeah, just to the importance of getting that dose right. It was definitely unexpected.
and that's where some education is important, even for microdosing. I know there's a lot of old school people out there that think microdosing are for people that are weak or whatever the story is. But the reality is, with things like mushrooms, you can get the wrong strain of mushrooms. It can be an incredibly potent and psychedelic mushroom.
Absolutely.
Where 100 milligrams sends you on a psychedelic trip for 6 hours, which is why education is so important. We have Reggie Harris and Tomas from Oakland Hi-Fi, and they're going to be teaching all about all of the different psilocybin strains in our class, which ones are best for microdosing, which ones to avoid. I know I had an experience in Colorado a few years ago where a former NFL hockey player, I'm not going to say anyone's name, but they're in the space, gave me what he said was a microdose. And about an hour and a half later, I began to trip super hard, and all of the humans turned into lizards. And it got so crazy that I had to go lock myself up in a bedroom and lay in a bed for 6 to 7 hours until I came back to reality. And it was scary and it was not fun. And I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. And it just shows you that you have to be careful with microdosing. I went to Texas a few months ago to be a part of a huge podcast, was super excited to be on it. And the host and I did LSD. And we got so high on LSD that we couldn't do the podcast. And the podcast wasn't usable. And now I have to go back in August and do it again. And that's LSD for you, right? You think you're taking a small amount and maybe you didn't eat that day, or you're a little nervous and there's certain situations that heightened it. Next thing you know, your microdose is a mini dose, and it's really uncomfortable. So there are so many stories where the microdose turns into a mini dose, and that's why education is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely important. And, it's not that those experiences don't have value like we've been talking about, but when you're not expecting it, when you haven't prepared, when you are expecting to have a nice, microdose night out, dancing or whatnot, and all of a sudden you're like in the midst of this major psychedelic experience, that can be a little unnerving. And definitely, yeah, I've had similar experiences like that. Like I've learned that, I went to a show like a few months back in Denver, and, a friend of mine was like, "Hey, would you like some of this?" And I'm like, "No, I'm sticking with what I grew because I know how potent it is. Like, I don't have to worry about like all of a sudden having to go back to the hotel room because, it was way more intense." And I'm really glad that you have Reggie and the guys from Oakland Hi-Fi there. I had Dave Hodges from the Church of Ambrosia, who works pretty closely with them, on last year. And he was talking about the same thing, about like that some of the testing that they've done, there are strains of psilocybin mushrooms that are 900 times more potent than other mushrooms. And so, yeah, like what you're saying, like it can so wildly vary that education and that preparation is so important.
Yeah, and mushrooms are going the way of cannabis in regards to strains, right? As
Right.
cannabis became more popular and legal, more people became breeding it, more people began mixing things together, more strains came out, more varieties, more strengths, right? So we need to have that same kind of education with psilocybin. I think there's 180 to 200 different psilocybin containing mushrooms on the planet. So it's just really important that we educate people, right? And you can think you're taking a microdose and you could be tripping for 8 to 12 hours. And that's where, with a little bit of education and a little bit of training, we can stop those uncomfortable experiences from happening.
Yeah, 100%. As a way to kind of bring our show to the close, I like to ask guests like what their vital point is. The vital point is the name of the podcast. For me, my vital point is always like, regardless of whether you're doing breath work or working with psilocybin or, meditation, whatever it is, the vital point is that we practice. Like we can't just listen to a podcast and then expect that our problems are going to go away, or you have to get your hands dirty, right? And experience and practice. Is there something in your work or in your life, it could just have come up organically in this conversation, or maybe it's something that's really alive in your work right now, that you could share as your vital point?
Yeah, I actually just read something this morning about how important it is just to show up, right? And just to
Mm.
put yourself in the environments. Whether it's just showing up at the gym and doing it every day, whether you want to or not, or it's showing up in the right places. It's all about showing up and motivating and getting there, right? And putting yourself in the right places and environments on a daily basis for you to thrive. So I really think that people need to realize it's important to stay motivated, keep the momentum going, and continue to show up. And that's the really beautiful thing about, people call it luck, but really luck is just preparation and timing, meeting in the right place. So if you want something in your life, just continue to show up day after day after day after day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. And it's been a real pleasure to finally have our conversation. I'm glad that we made it happen. Definitely check out the Microdosing Facilitator Training Program that Adam's a part of. It looks really amazing. You've got a really great roster of people helping you with it. So we'll put the information on the show page. It's definitely something that you should check out if this conversation was of interest to you. And then other than that, Adam, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experience and your wisdom on the Vital Point podcast.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for having me.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed this episode and that you found value and inspiration in it. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could just take a moment and leave me a review. It's a simple, cost-free way to support the show and help more like-minded people discover the show. We got to work with those algorithms, people. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights directly delivered to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the learning journey going. When you sign up, I'll send you a free guide to using Breathwork for integration as a way to show my gratitude for your support. It's a wonderful thing to start to do in combination with your microdosing practice to really start to kickstart that change that you're looking for. Remember, it's not about the method that you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself in practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'm honored to accompany you on yours. Make sure you check out Adam on Instagram or at flowstatemicro.com. And also make sure you look at the Microdosing Facilitator Training Program that he's a part of. You can find more information on that at flowstatemicro.com/microdosing-facilitator-training. And if you go to flowstatemicro.com, you'll definitely be able to navigate to more information on the facilitator training program there. So until our next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.